Rigdon. Yes. In order to understand this, let us consider another example with a mirror. Suppose that several fundamental information building blocks form a structure that represents a local point, some object. We put it in the middle of a room in which a multitude of mirrors is placed at a certain angle, in such a way that it is reflected in each of them. So the object is in the middle of the room, and it is reflected in every mirror. Also, we see it, and therefore information about it exists in our minds. In short, the information about the object exists simultaneously in several places. If we remove one of the mirrors, we will not observe this object in that place, but when we return the mirror, it will reappear. So in fact, information about it has not disappeared. It is just that we see the object under certain conditions of manifestation of information, and once conditions have changed, we no longer see it. Objectively, however, this object continues to exist in that place in terms of information. The reflection may have a continuous flow, so it means that this object exists in each point of this room, and incidentally, not only of the room, but also of the space outside the limits of the room, regardless of whether we see it or not. According to quantum physics, the existence of the electron in the particle state depends on the very act of measurement or observation. In other words, the electron, which has not been measured and is not being observed, behaves not as a particle, but as a wave. In this case, there is a whole field of probabilities for it, since it exists here and now in many places simultaneously, that is, in the superposition state. At that, despite the fact that the electron has multiple positions, it will be one and the same electron and one and the same wave. The superposition is the ability to simultaneously exist in all the possible alternative states until a choice is made, until the observer makes a measurement, a calculation of the given object. As soon as the observer focuses his or her attention on the behavior of the electron, the electron, immediately collapses into a particle. That is, it transforms from a wave into a material object, the position of which can be localized. In short, after the measurement, so to speak, after the choice of the observer, one object will exist only in one place. Anastasia. Wow, that is interesting information. The findings of quantum physics, as it turns out, are valuable for those who are engaged in self-perfection. This explains, in a way, why a person fails at meditation. After all, what contributes, so to say, to the materialization of the meditation process, meaning to the transition from the wave state to the material state in which energy once again acquires properties of matter? It is observation and control from the animal nature. In other words, meditation fails when the mental processes which are typical of the usual everyday state of consciousness become active. In this case, the brain is always trying to identify something and localize the object of observation. This situation develops when the personality does not immerse itself sufficiently into an altered state of consciousness during a meditation, or when it loses control over this state. This allows the animal nature to intervene in the process of observation. Consequently, associative images appear and the truth is lost. The wave transforms into matter. But as soon as you turn off the brain with its thought processes and fully enter into a meditation, thanks to a manifestation of your deep feelings, then an expansion of consciousness takes place and the matter observed from the spiritual nature turns into a wave. You merge with the true reality of the world. You become one with it. And at the same time, you feel all of its diversity, like there are many of you and you are everywhere. This is when real meditation takes place as the process of cognizing the truth. Rigdon. Absolutely. The world of the animal nature is the world of dominance of matter and its laws. The world of God is the world of perfect energies. When you meditate, when you're in an altered state of consciousness, you then become a part of the process, a part of the divine manifestation here. As soon as the observer from the animal nature activates, it seems to you that you gain control over matter, while in fact it is matter, the animal mind, that gains control over you. As a result, you become a more manifested material object. In fact, you turn into a corpuscular object of general matter, corpuscle from Latin corpusculum, meaning body, the smallest particle of matter, and obey its laws. If you switch to the wave state, you become a part of the divine manifestation in this world, that is, an observer from the spiritual nature. That is why it is said, "What you have more of in you, so shall you be." In the state of meditation, ordinary perception disappears. The consciousness of an experienced practitioner, particularly if we consider his or her state in the lotus flower spiritual practice, expands beyond the boundaries of the familiar world. The person feels that he is simultaneously everywhere. You can say that the superposition in quantum physics, the acquisition of the wave state, is the same as the acquisition in a meditation of the state of exit to higher dimensions in which matter is already absent. The superposition in the state of meditation is when you see, meaning that you feel the whole world and its diverse manifestations with the deepest feelings. But as soon as the observer focuses on an object, his consciousness becomes narrowed and limited by the observed object. That is, once you make a choice and focus on specific details, the wave transforms into matter. After all, when you concentrate on details, the comprehensive perception disappears and only details remain. Thoughts from the animal nature are a kind of a tool, a power to materialize objects, while feelings from the spiritual nature are a force for expanding consciousness and accessing higher dimensions. Anastasia. Yes, how complex this world is and how obvious in it can simple things be. Rigdon. Now, regarding quantum physics, on the one hand, the notion of the observer has expanded the boundaries of scientific knowledge, but on the other, it has brought them to a dead end. After all, the perspective of the super-observer proves that there exists a tremendous force which can influence from the outside the universe, all its objects, and all the processes taking place in it. Anastasia. So in fact, this is another way to scientifically prove the existence of God? Rigdon. Yes. Human has a soul, as a part of the divine power. The more he transforms his inner world and the more his personality fuses with the soul, unfolding before God, the stronger he becomes spiritually and gets the ability to influence the physical world from higher dimensions. And the more such people, the greater this influence is. The super-observer is God, who can influence everything. Human, as an observer from the spiritual nature, is the observer who can interfere in the processes of the world and change them at the micro level. Of course, certain manipulations with matter are accessible to people from the perspective of the observer from the animal nature. But a person gets the real power of influence only when his observer from the spiritual nature activates. Anastasia. When you do spiritual practices and have an expanded view of the reality of the world, you realize that this is a fact. Incredible wonders made by those who at different times and on different continents were considered holy serve as proof of that. Because for them, it was easy to stop the elements, to change the structure of water, to cure any disease, and even to resurrect people from the dead. Rigdon. Of course, People cannot even imagine what abilities are embedded in them. Observation is the first step to knowing the hidden secrets. We influence a particular situation, its possible outcome, and a resolution in the world that is invisible to us by the fact of contemplating from the perspective of the observer from the animal nature or from the spiritual nature, since we make a choice. Each situation is a kind of an answer not only to your presence in this place here and now, but also to how exactly you are observing yourself in this moment. Anastasia. In essence, we observe a part of ourselves in what surrounds us, and it is not the reality of the world that we judge, but the way we interpret it according to our experience and our understanding of the world. Rigdon. That's right. By expressing something about the world, we essentially express something about ourselves. A good listener will always hear a lot more about the speaker than he intends to reveal about himself. Anastasia. In other words, one way or another, we see the outside world through a kind of rose-colored glasses of the observer from the animal nature. The less we work on transforming our inner world, the worse it is for us, because what will grow more in this case is just the experience related to the domination of the observer from the animal nature, which means that we will get an even more distorted picture of the perception of the world. Rigdon. Yes, this incidentally can be traced even from the perspective of the existing knowledge about the brain, consciousness, person's way of thinking, and the way his worldview is formed. As a rule, in a consumer society, certain mindsets are instilled into a person from birth that the world is material, and supposedly this is the only reality existing for humans. I have already said that our brain is set up in such a way that it adapts to various stereotypes very quickly. Moreover, it will thereafter rely on them until the person chooses some new ones. Thus, a person begins to build his life from childhood, in essence based on the wrong mindsets and a one-sided view of the world from the perspective of the observer from the animal nature. He simply ignores anything that does not correspond to his mindsets and his personal choice. He chooses a kind of a very narrow life range of perception of the world and himself, while not even interested in anything more. As a result, people use commonplace associations and become quite predictable in their actions and intentions. What does that selective information from the outside world, the larger part of which comes from vision, represent? What we see, according to that very quantum physics, is an illusion generated by the geometry of space. In the usual state of consciousness, we perceive the world not from the perspective of a detached space observer or another observer, but from the perspective of the observer who is steeped in this three-dimensional world and is placed at specific coordinates at a given point in time. That is why we will perceive the world one-sidedly only from this point, and there will be distortions in this case. We see even our bodies as a three-dimensional image perceived by our brain that is tuned to a state of consciousness that is habitual for us. If we change the state of consciousness and, for example, look at our physical bodies in the state of meditation, we will see the aura and the shells that correspond to it, basically a completely different structure. While doing more complex meditations related to observing from higher dimensions, you can see your whole structure on a larger scale, including the parts located in other dimensions. All this, accordingly, will expand our understanding of the energy structure of a human being. In addition, we must take into account that the brain is located in the cranium. In other words, it is completely isolated from the external environment. It has no direct contact with the light of the surrounding physical space. The light that enters the eye is simply converted into an electrical signal, and it is this signal that the brain analyzes and decodes, figuratively speaking, in its darkness. In other words, our brain does not see the real picture, or rather the illusion of the geometry of a given space, but only a signal converted from the outside, an electric copy of the image visible in the limited range of perception. Anastasia. Generally speaking, this is an electric copy of the state of the observed objects of a moment that already passed. Moreover, this copy cannot be called even a fragment of information out of the variety of the visible and of course the invisible world. And man still delusively thinks that he knows this world and understands it. Rigdon. Yes, man believes so out of the habit of thinking from the animal nature. But he must ask himself the question, who exactly is thinking in him, and what is consciousness? The brain is a bio-device, exceptional in the complexity of its structure and functions, including defense, that has an astronomical number of elements and connections between them and does not have direct contact with the environment. The brain is overabundant. In other words, it is capable of performing immeasurably more complex functions than necessary for living on planet Earth, for example. The brain is constantly at work, both night and day. It only changes its states, for example, to sleep, wakefulness, and so forth. It has an inherent constant self-reorganization of its system. It usually remains stable for 0.5 to 2.5 seconds. Then some variable and flexible links activate, others get turned off, while the rigid links are constantly working. The brain kind of gets bored from the monotony. There is an ongoing thought process. Processing of different information in it takes place around the clock. The brain is a mediator between consciousness and the world. It receives and tries to decipher codes, in other words, various signals, including those coming from the five senses. But it is especially important to note that the brain is capable of receiving many other signals, not only from the visible, but also from the invisible world. What serves as proof of this for the present-day scholars are the experiments conducted with the participation of people who engage in certain meditative practices while altering their state of consciousness. These are Buddhist monks, the Siberian shamans, the clairvoyants, and so on. Besides, this experimental group includes people who have manifested unusual abilities sporadically and spontaneously, which include telepathy, thought transfer, prediction of the future, telekinesis, the ability to move physical objects and change their shape by thought, and so on. In general, these abilities are inherent in any person if developed. Anastasia. This is in fact evidence that a person in possession of basic knowledge is capable of successfully exploring the world in an altered state of consciousness without leaving his room, with his eyes closed, and without the help of technical resources or known sensory organs. Rigdon. Note that such knowledge will be much more informative and richer than that obtained by a person in the usual state of consciousness. Why? Because his consciousness begins to work in a different mode. You can trace how brain activity reorganizes itself in an altered state of consciousness even with modern equipment. When human thinks in the ordinary state of consciousness, the activity of the nerve cells in different areas of the brain appears similar to a starry sky, in other words, scattered. But when a person is in an altered state of consciousness, then an entirely different picture of brain activity forms. The stars sort of line up in the form of peculiar star clusters of a particular form, spheres, clouds, streams, and beams with a clear direction. In addition, attention should be paid to the structure, shape of the human skull from the inside and the tissues adjacent to it. The frontal, parietal, and occipital bones, with their special relief, deserve particular attention. This is sort of a biological prototype of concave mirrors that can focus, absorb, and reflect waves of different frequencies. This design serves as a good resonator, from the Latin word resono, I sound in response, respond. In other words, it is capable of accumulating and focusing the energy of vibrations and strengthening it. Anastasia. This information is quite interesting. As we know from the example of modern radio engineering, concave mirrors have the properties of receiving and transmitting antennas. Rigdon. Quite right. So the brain is, to a large extent, a unique biological device that performs many functions and serves as a receiver and transmitter of information, not only from the outside visible, but also from the invisible world, including man's inner world. When a person starts meditating, he gives a mental order engaging these or those chakrans and activating subtle energies which activate certain areas in the energy structure. Thanks to such mental order, the brain of the physical body, too, reconfigures itself into the operating mode of an altered state of consciousness. We can say that quite an interesting process takes place in deeper meditations. The meditator practically executes stopping of thoughts, and the information in its pure form is obtained due to the force which people since the ancient times called the sixth sense or intuition, intuitive knowledge. And learning in this way is much deeper, richer, and more varied than the usual apparent perception of the visible world. After all, the observer from the spiritual nature perceives the energy processes with feelings, wholly and clearly, experiencing the true reality. Thanks to this, it becomes obvious for him after meditation that there is a significant difference between what the human brain stereotypically perceives as reality in a three-dimensional world and what in fact reality which shapes the events of this world is. For such an observer, it is not a problem to extract information that is way ahead of the current scientific understanding of certain processes in this world. So the outside world for the brain as a bio-device is just multiple copies which it perceives according to the task assigned to it by the observer in accordance with the inner world and the choice of the observer. Each person lives his reality according to his choice and inner perception. Anastasia. Yes, now I have an even deeper understanding of why we should strive to live and gain first-hand experience with the perspective of the observer from the spiritual nature. Only then there is a real chance not to waste your life on numerous misconceptions, not to get stuck in the illusions of observations from the animal nature, to change your destiny and shape the reality of your spiritual salvation even during this life. After all, what we think about is what will be created, manifesting one or another reality for us. Rigdon. In his knowledge, a human can go as far as he himself believes he can. The more persistent he is to move away from his limiting mindsets formed by the animal nature, the more apparent his influence on reality will be. Having formed in life a strong perspective of the observer from the spiritual nature, a person can understand his deep interconnection and interaction with the whole world. Human, as the observer from the animal nature, registers the objects that are important for him in the surrounding world, reinforcing their importance for himself by the power of his attention. Giving importance to this or that object depends on the outlook of a person, his experience in cognition of the world and himself. Once a person begins to rely on external circumstances, he begets motion, which makes him anxious and manifests multiple illusions that grasp his attention even more. Human, as the observer from the spiritual nature, looks impartially at the world. His support in life and the significant object is the soul. After all, it is impossible to know the truth of the external without knowing the truth of the inner, because then there is no observer to whom all the secrets of the world are open. Anastasia. You know, there was a point in my life when I perceived many of your words more intuitively than consciously. They were inspiring and helped me to live and overcome human difficulties. But when advanced practices started, especially those related to the invisible structure of a human, this greatly expanded the limits of my perception of the world and contributed to acquisition of an extraordinary spiritual experience. It provided an opportunity for the spiritual contemplation and self-discovery in the deepest feelings. Thanks to this experience, I realized the value of the knowledge that you are giving us. Indeed, experiences in meditation cannot be put into words, but they fundamentally change the attitude towards the surrounding world when you really feel something more valuable than the whole material world. The most interesting part is that since this practical breakthrough, the quality of meditations has changed. Especially, I would like to note the versatility of the lotus flower meditation in relation to the work with the deepest feelings and the wonderful practical basic knowledge about yourself that enables one to know the energy structure of a human in the meditation pyramid. By the way, is it possible to tell the world about this meditation? And if so, I would be very grateful to you if people could learn about this primordial knowledge directly from you.